Imagine staring through your binoculars across a misty French field in 1944. You're a German officer, and what you see makes your blood run cold. An entire American armored division massing for attack. Columns of tanks, rows of artillery, trucks, encampments, more than enough firepower to smash your defenses by morning. You radio it up the chain of command. Reinforcements shift, plans change, and yet, none of it is real. Those tanks? Inflatable rubber. The trucks? Wooden frames. The soldiers? A handful of artists and sound engineers with record players and paint cans. This was the Ghost Army of World War II, a top-secret U.S. unit that fought not with bullets, but with illusions. Today, we're uncovering how a band of creatives turned deception into a weapon and helped shorten the war. Stay with me, because the tricks they pulled off are wilder than most war movies you've ever seen. The Ghost Army sounds like something out of a comic book, but it was entirely real and classified for decades. Officially known as the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, this U.S. unit used inflatable vehicles, fake radio chatter, and elaborate stagecraft to mislead the Nazis about where and when the Allies would strike. In this video, we'll walk through how they were formed, the insane creativity behind their tricks, and the specific battles where their illusions likely saved thousands of lives. We'll also look at how long this story stayed hidden and why it matters today. If you love deep-dive history and untold war stories, you're in the right place. Consider subscribing and turning on the notification bell so you don't miss future episodes, and watch till the end, because some of the final operations they pulled off are almost unbelievable in their audacity. To understand the Ghost Army, we need to go back to a key idea in modern warfare: deception as strategy. By World War II, military leaders knew that moving actual troops was only half the game. If you could manipulate what the enemy believed, you could dictate where they sent forces, how they defended, and even whether they dared to attack. The British had already begun experimenting with decoys and fake radio traffic in North Africa. The Americans watched closely. The lesson was clear. In a total war, information and perception were weapons. The U.S. Army decided to create a specialized deception unit, one that would operate almost like a traveling theater company, but in uniform. Its job: imitate entire divisions using props, sound, and signals. The result was the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, activated in January 1944, just months before D-Day, and destined to become one of the war's strangest formations. The 23rd was unlike any other U.S. Army unit. Instead of being filled mostly with career soldiers, it pulled in artists, designers, engineers, architects, even fashion illustrators. Many came from art schools like Pratt and Cooper Union. These were people who, in peacetime, drew magazine covers, designed store windows, or painted murals. Now they were asked to paint camouflage, forge insignia, and design fake military camps. Commanders understood that to fool the German high command, you needed people who knew how to control perspective, sound, and visual storytelling. They grouped these talents into several components: a camouflage engineers battalion, a signal company for radio deception, and a special operations company for overall planning. Crucially, the unit was small, about 1,100 men, but it was meant to impersonate tens of thousands. Their mission was not to fight head-on, but to act, to perform, to persuade the enemy's eyes and ears. The most famous tools of the Ghost Army were their inflatable tanks and vehicles. These were life-size rubber replicas of Sherman tanks, artillery pieces, and trucks that could be carried by a handful of men, then pumped up in about 30 minutes. From the air or at a distance, they looked convincingly solid, especially when arranged in realistic formations, with tire tracks and churned-up mud carefully faked around them. Soldiers would position these decoys along likely reconnaissance paths, ensuring German scouts and aircraft saw what they were meant to see: apparent buildups of armor. At night, they added fake campfires and dimmed vehicle lights to complete the illusion. The beauty of this approach was efficiency. For the cost of some rubber and air, They could create the appearance of an entire armored division, forcing the enemy to divert divisions, artillery, and precious fuel to counter nothing at all. Visual deception alone wasn't enough. If the Germans were listening to U.S. radio traffic, which they were, the broadcasts also had to match what spies and reconnaissance saw. That's where the 3132 Signal Service Company came in. These radio operators studied the communication styles of real divisions, call signs, message rhythms, even typical mistakes. Then they mimicked them so faithfully that German intelligence believed entire U.S. units were somewhere they weren't. Operators moved trucks with powerful antennae around like stage props, broadcasting fake orders and reports. To an enemy analyst, it looked like clear, consistent evidence. Radio nets lighting up where visual scouts also reported tanks and camps. The Ghost Army sometimes impersonated multiple divisions at once, creating phantom corps that appeared on German situation maps. In a war where commanders depended on incomplete, often conflicting information, this carefully crafted radio theater could tip decisions at the highest levels. Perhaps the most cinematic element of the Ghost Army's toolkit was its use of sound. Working with engineers and the sound company of the Army's Signal Corps, they recorded authentic noises from real armored units, engines revving, tanks clanking over bridges, bulldozers, shouted commands, even the rumble of hundreds of vehicles on the move. These recordings were pressed onto high-quality discs. Then, in the field, specialized sound trucks equipped with massive speakers blasted these audio illusions across the countryside, sometimes audible up to 15 miles away. By carefully adjusting volume, direction, and timing, they could make it seem like a column was approaching, turning, or idling just beyond the tree line. Combined with fake tire tracks and inflatable vehicles, the effect could be eerily convincing at night. For German patrols listening in the dark, the brain filled in the gaps. Where there was sound, there must be steel. Deception went beyond gadgets. It was performance. Ghost Army soldiers became method actors of war, role-playing entire units. They created fake unit patches and stenciled bogus division numbers on trucks. They hung distinctive symbols on signposts and casually dropped invented unit names in conversations in towns, knowing German agents and informants might overhear. They staged visible activities, engineers pretending to study maps, fake military police redirecting traffic, officers inspecting inflatable tanks as if they were real. Even small details mattered, like the way a specific division wore its helmets or parked its jeeps. A favorite trick was setting up bogus headquarters in cafes, where they would loudly discuss fabricated plans, counting on enemy ears. This theatrical layer tied together the visual, radio, and sound deceptions, giving German intelligence a believable human story to match the forged data. It was part war, part improv theater, and the stakes were life or death. The Ghost Army's first major test came shortly after D-Day, in Normandy. In late June 1944, they were tasked with simulating elements of the 2nd Armored Division and 30th Infantry Division to mislead German commanders about the strength and position of U.S. forces. They deployed inflatable tanks and artillery, set up dummy bivouacs, and began broadcasting fake radio chatter to suggest a buildup in areas where no real attack was planned. Their goal was to draw attention and resources away from the actual offensives, pushing inland from the beaches. While precise cause and effect is hard to prove, war is chaotic, German situation maps and post-war analyses indicate that these deceptions contributed to overestimations of Allied strength in certain sectors. That miscalculation made commanders more cautious, slowing counterattacks and buying the Allies precious time to secure footholds, expand beachheads, and bring more real divisions ashore. One of the Ghost Army's most significant operations was around Metz and the Moselle River in late 1944. As General Patton's Third Army advanced into eastern France, the 23rd was ordered to fake a major crossing in one sector to mask the real crossing elsewhere. They set up inflatable artillery batteries and dummy supply dumps, complete with fake fuel drums and crates. Sound trucks played the noises of bridging equipment and heavy vehicles assembling near the riverbanks. Radio operators simulated the traffic of an entire corps preparing to force the Moselle. Meanwhile, the true crossing sites remained relatively quiet and concealed. German forces, perceiving a major threat where the Ghost Army pointed, shifted artillery and reserves accordingly. This misallocation eased pressure on Patton's actual bridgeheads, helping his forces punch through and continue their rapid advance toward the German border. As 1944 turned into 1945, the Ghost Army took part in more than 20 deception operations. One of the most famous came during the Battle of the Bulge aftermath, Operation Viersen in March 1945. The mission was to mislead the Germans about where the U.S. Ninth Army would cross the Rhine River. The 23rd simulated the presence of 2 full divisions, about 30,000 men, using just a few hundred specialists and their toolkit of inflatables, sound, and radio fiction. They constructed fake assembly areas, lined roads with dummy vehicles, and blasted recorded traffic noises through the night. Meanwhile, the real crossing point was prepared quietly elsewhere. German reconnaissance reported substantial forces at the decoy sites, and enemy artillery fire concentrated on the wrong areas. When the true assault came, it faced less resistance than expected. Many historians argue that this operation alone likely saved thousands of Allied lives in the critical push into Germany. What made the Ghost Army especially effective was how carefully its operations were integrated with genuine combat plans. They didn't just scatter decoys randomly. Each ruse was crafted to exploit what Allied intelligence knew about German fears and assumptions. If German commanders expected Patton to be aggressive, the unit would mimic his style elsewhere, reinforcing that belief. If terrain suggested a likely crossing point, they built a fake one nearby while the real planners quietly chose a less obvious site. This interplay created a feedback loop in enemy minds. Once the Germans began to suspect deception, they also had to worry that any apparent weakness might itself be a trap. That uncertainty slowed their decision-making. It forced them to hedge, to hold reserves back, to hesitate. In a fast-moving war of maneuver, even a day's delay or a misdirected division could shift the balance on an entire front. For decades after the war, almost no one knew this unit had existed. The Ghost Army's operations remained classified, buried in archives, while veterans quietly returned to civilian life, often back to careers in art and design. It wasn't until the 1980s and 1990s that researchers and filmmakers began uncovering their story through declassified documents and interviews. Survivors described the surreal experience of waging war with paintbrushes, speakers, and rubber tanks, often just a few miles from the front lines. They faced real danger: German artillery, strafing aircraft, and the constant risk that their bluff would be called. Yet they received little public recognition. Only in the 21st century did books, documentaries, and museum exhibits start to give them their due. In 2022, the U.S. finally awarded the Ghost Army a Congressional Gold Medal, honoring their extraordinary service and long-hidden contribution to victory. The story of the Ghost Army leaves us with several powerful takeaways. First, it shows that creativity can be as decisive in war as raw firepower. A few hundred artists and engineers armed with rubber, paint, and recording equipment could divert entire German divisions. Second, it highlights how information, what commanders think is happening, can matter more than what is actually on the ground. The Ghost Army didn't just create illusions, they shaped enemy decisions. Third, it reminds us that history is often written around tanks and heroes at the front, while quieter, stranger contributions stay in the shadows for decades. Finally, this unit foreshadowed modern psychological and information warfare, from electronic deception to cyber operations. By understanding how they worked, we get a glimpse into both the past and the future of conflict, where perception itself becomes a battlefield. If this deep dive into the Ghost Army surprised you, imagine how many other hidden corners of history are still out there. On this channel, we explore those lesser-known stories, where creativity, technology, and human ingenuity collide with world events. If you'd like to see more investigations like this, consider subscribing and turning on the notification bell so you don't miss future episodes. It really helps support long-form, well-researched content. In the comments, tell me, which Ghost Army tactic impressed you the most? The inflatable tanks, the fake radio networks, or the soundscapes of invisible armies? And what other secret units or overlooked operations should we cover next? If you want to keep going right now, check out the video on screen about the deception plans behind D-Day itself. Thanks for watching, and remember, in war, things are rarely what they seem.